Hello, everyone. Welcome back to episode 2 of how to build a professionally designed website with NextJS, Payload CMS, and TypeScript. If you haven't seen episode 1, I would probably suggest going back and getting yourself up to speed with what we covered in that episode. It came in about an hour and 50 minutes, and we covered a lot of ground. In that episode, we went over the just general project plan. We went over the real world work that we're going to be building in this series, and we did a design review. So we went through the comps in Figma. We identified different layout building blocks and identified how to best reuse things on the front end side, and we completely scaffolded out the Payload CMS backend so that now we get to work on the front end and focus. And that's how I like to work. I like to do things in chunks like that. The last episode was pretty successful, got a lot done. If you're more interested in the front end, you don't necessarily need to go back and watch that first episode, but I think it would benefit you if you are looking to see from kind of start to finish how a professional design firm would go about building a website. So that said, with this second episode, we're going to be actually moving over to the front end. We're going to be scaffolding out the NextJS website, and we're going to be bringing in all of our dependencies for React on the React side. Got some low-level utilities for like CSS grid. I think we're going to have some parallax utilities, maybe a slider, things like that. But otherwise, most of this is going to be written from scratch. So ideally, you're going to come away from this episode learning a lot about how we at Trouble set up CSS frameworks, how we organize our components, how we split up an interface into multiple different reusable components, and it's going to be pretty cool. I love the front end. I love this stuff. Pretty nerdy. That's cool. I hope you do too, and let me know what you think about how this video goes, but let's jump in. All right. So I think the first thing we're going to do is take a look at React JSS, and that's the CSS kind of, I don't really know what to call it. It's a framework? Not really. It's not a library. It's an authoring tool. Look at that. Okay, so that is what Trouble has been using most recently for our CSS. We've done a lot of different approaches for how to author CSS with React projects. We've gone from just straightforward CSS and Sass and just using something like Style Loader and Webpack to just plop them all in the head of the document. We have done CSS modules. We've tried out styled components. I looked at Tailwind. I'm not into that. And the one that we are landing on mostly is JSS, at least for now. Now, things aren't perfect. In my opinion, this is a very, very touchy subject because CSS in general, people don't really like to write it, right? And I'm not going to lie. I don't really. It's a necessary evil, and if you do it right, then you can take a lot of that pain away, but it's not as fulfilling as writing some script or some component that is super dynamic and really responsibly renders and blah, blah, blah. There are just more fun parts of web development than CSS, in my opinion. And I don't think we found a specific authoring tool, quote, that fits all needs perfectly. So that said, JSS is the closest we've found. We like it. It's already installed. I went through and I wired up everything necessary to install it. You can look at the Next.js examples. There is a React JSS example. You just have to do a couple things. You have to have a custom app. You have to have an effect that removes the styles on mount. And then you have to have a custom document that sets up some registry stuff for your JSS, because it's server-side rendered, so all those styles need to be calculated on the server as well as in the browser, and that's where this document comes in. So you have a style tag with an ID, and you are going to, I believe, inject it somewhere. Something. Yeah, registry toString right there. So you're going to have all those styles right from the server. Now, we have a completely bare bones project right now. There's no CSS. I already went through and I removed the CSS modules from the Next.js payload boilerplate. So if I do yarn dev and I hop over to the front end, you're going to see that it is totally unstyled right now. It's Times New Roman, good old faithful there. And we're going to just scaffold out some baseline CSS requirements. The first thing that I generally do is I'm going to create a just a CSS folder at the top. Ooh, I figured out how to make a new folder. You click out here and then you click here. So that was a trick from the last video. Really threw me for a loop. But so with this project, because it's all flat, because it's got Next.js right next to Payload, we're going to have our collections, we're going to have our components, CSS, all in a nice top-level directory. That's pretty nice organization, I think. So the first thing we're going to need is some type of app styles, some type of global styles. So I'm going to write app.ts, and JSS, all of your files are actually just JavaScript. You write CSS right inside of JavaScript. So you're going to import I believe it's a helper function from React JSS. So it's import create use styles from React JSS. Okay. And then you can export const app styles equals create use styles and then pass it an object. And then in here, that's pretty much how this is going to work. And in here is where we're going to define all of our global styles. So there is one plugin that I've also installed. It's called, let's see, JSS Global. It allows you to do a fancy JSS technique like this, at global, and then you can style global elements right inside of JSS. Because JSS otherwise is very component based. It all operates off of React hooks. But what if you need to just style your HTML? Style your baseline HTML H1. So this global plugin allows you to do that. So for example, I'm going to put, let's say, font family, let's say system, it's got to be a string. And that's good for now. Well, Helvetica, new Helvetica. Okay, cool. So in the mockup, the actual real world work, we're using a super nice typeface called Lausanne, a French word, French town. I don't know how to say it, but it's a super nice typeface. And I am not going to check this in to the repo, because then you would have it for free. And you have to pay for this typeface. So it's super nice. We already purchased a license for it, but I'm just going to use default browser system UI for all of the typography. Pretty much in this entire app or in this entire website, it's all Lausanne. I think it's a really, really nice typeface. It's a little bit unique, but it's not crazy. Still very readable. Nice at smaller styles, nice uppercase, really well-rounded typeface. So that's what we're using. But for now, we're just going system UI. Can't check that TTF into a repo because then that's piracy, I think. So let's say margin 0. Wait, we need to turn that on the body as well. So we can say HTML body margin 0. Pesky reset, right? Some of this is going to be like just resetting CSS that comes with the browser. Like I think most of you should already know that by now. But so for example, if I go over here, the body has that 8 pixels around the outside of it. And we need to get rid of that because that's not going to be good for anybody. So this global CSS will do that. Now we need to import this CSS and we need to actually use it yet, because right now, as you can see, the body still had that set of styles. So what we need to do is we need to go into our custom app.js. We're going to import that file. We're going to say import, let's say, classes. What do we call it? App styles. I'm probably going to rename this. I don't like that name because now we have to say const classes equals app styles. And that's a hook. So that should be called use app styles or use styles, really. And that will be consistent throughout the rest of this app. So I'm just going to convert that to default export, call it use styles. It's going to yell at me for a minute. I don't care. Go over here and export default. Whoops. Cool. because all JSS, it's going to export a hook every time, and then you can use it in your component just like that, and then apply it here. Oh, it's telling me TypeScript is already yelling at me for stuff. I need to add an actual app definition, and we're going to say height 100% just because I gave it this div. I don't want that div to screw with any height. So that's cool. So now let's check and see. We got our JSS working. And it canceled out the base margin on the body. And so we're kind of starting to roll a little bit. We're not done. Not yet. We have a couple more things that we need to do. I'm going to show you some cool stuff. Next up, let's do the baseline grid. So for trouble, everything we do is going to be using some type of baseline pixel value. If it's 25 pixels or whatever. 1910. Let's see. We are 1910. Yeah, this place. They have a really nice write-up on typography, and I'm going to show it to you. You can read it on your own time, but let's see something. Yeah, here. They talk about the baseline grid in a really nice way. I think they actually have a couple articles, but at Trouble, we use a multiple for our baseline grid for everything. So all of our type styles are going to be aligned to some multiple of a baseline value. And I'll let you take a look at this article on your own time. 1910, they're not around anymore. They did the Battlefield 3 work, I believe. Maybe Battlefield 4. They do some cool stuff, or did. I don't know what they're up to now, but I always looked up to them. Anyway, so back to our mockup. We have a baseline grid already set up in this file. Figma Control-G, that's on a Mac. I don't know what it is on Windows. You guys are on your own. On Mac, Control-G shows the grid, and we can go check it out and see what it's set to. Let's open this up. Looks like we've got some nice sizing going on, some consistency. You can see how that baseline grid really helps out because you've got 2 of the baselines. You've got 2, and then the logo itself is 3. And then the header has that bottom padding of 2 as well. Looks like the grid is 20 pixels, and we have a 12 column 40 pixel gutter, or a 40 pixel column. So look at that, it's beautiful. All this stuff lines up perfectly to that grid. Even the horizontal distribution of the columns lines up to that multiple. Now some people, as to what you can set your baseline to, that is a hot topic, and people will beat me up if I say the wrong answer. So I'm just gonna say what I think. It doesn't matter. I've seen people use 5 pixels, which is just asinine to me because that's way too small and it doesn't even matter at that point. People might think that it matters, but really does it? I don't think so. Anyway, things are larger than 5 pixels nowadays, mostly. So, I mean, knock yourself out, follow your heart. But sometimes we do like a 12 pixels, sometimes we do a 15 pixels, sometimes we do 20. Depends on the sizing of things and how it works out with the aesthetic of the website. And it's not a perfect science, honestly, it's not. But you can see here, grid's 20 pixels. We go over to our desktop, font size is 30, so that's splitting it already, but that is definitely okay because line height for body font size is definitely an important thing to get right for rhythm. The base size of the body is 18. Go to H1, that is going to have 100 pixel line height. H2 is going to have 100 pixel line height. Blah, 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 blah. So we're going to get back to that. Let's go over to our code and let's set up the baseline functionality, or the baseline grid. Okay, so baseline grid, we're going to create a new file. Let's create it in the right folder. We're going to call it base.ts, and we're going to use rems throughout this whole project. So we're going to set the font size on the HTML, and then every single other thing is going to use rems to size. And that way, for smaller screen sizes, all we have to do is set a smaller font size on the HTML in one place, and every single element that uses rem will automatically scale down accordingly as the screen size shrinks. That's a pretty cool trick. We do it in pretty much every single project that we have. But the first step to doing so successfully is declaring a couple variables. So export const body font size equals, let's say, what was it, 18? And then export const baseline pixels equals 30, right? Or 20. Okay. So then over here, we're going to import those. Import body font size and baseline pixels from base, and we're going to apply that to the HTML. So font size is body font size. That should be HTML font size. What am I doing here? Getting crazy. Line height is baseline pixels. Cool. So now what would be cool is if we, so this is 18, that's pretty big for mobile, but if we shrink it down to like 15 or whatever our mockup calls for on mobile, then everything will automatically get smaller. So when you say 1 rem, you're actually saying 18 pixels. There's a problem with that though, because that's not exactly what we want to do. We want to say 20 pixels, right? Because that's going to be much more common of a measurement. If it would be great if we could say like base 2, base 3, base 2, and then set everything as a multiple of our baseline grid. So we have a function for that we usually write, and I'm going to write it right now. Const base equals multiplier. We're going to set it equal to 1. It's going to return a string, and we're going to go. I'm reading off of my other monitor. I do not have this memorized. Baseline pixels divided by HTML font size times multiplier, and then pass it rem at the end. So what this is going to do, this function right here, you can say in your CSS, you can say base 2, or you can just say base. That's going to give you 18 divided by 20. And so rather than having to remember 0.9, because you could write 0.9 and that's going to give you 20, right? But rather than having to remember those crazy, 20 divided by 18 actually. So you're going to have to remember 1.111. And then if you wanted to do base 2, you would have to remember 2.222 and blah, blah, blah. So it's cleaner to do it this way. That way you can use this function. You're going to get the exact rem equivalent to your 20 pixels, and everybody's going to be happy. So I'm going to use this a lot. You're going to start to see that it'll become second nature, but that's just an interesting topic that we do a little bit differently. Once you set it up, you don't have to do anything else from there. So the next thing we're going to do, we're going to define our breakpoints. And we're going to use these in JS and in CSS, so you'll see that as well. But we're going to give ourselves a couple sizes. So extra small, let's say 480. Let's say small is 600. Let's say medium is 850. Large, 1120. XL, 1680. I don't know what these are going to be. We'll figure it out. We're going to base them on the grid itself. So some of these for trouble, some of these never change, like extra, extra large, and extra large. These are pretty good sizes, so that like you can kind of control the screen sizes. 1680 is a popular one. 1920 is obviously popular. So anything bigger than that is an extra large screen. But anything smaller, yeah, you get it. So we're going to get back to these. Might change these values a little bit, but it's just good to have them scaffolded out. Another thing we're going to do is going to define our colors. And we can look at Figma for that. So we have antique. That is going to be here. We have white, obviously. Ideally, we aren't going to be using white too much, but if we need it, there it is. I think everything should pretty much be antique. Then we have gray, and that is going to be what? 1.8. Okay, then we have red. And then I think we have blue. I'm just going to write these real quick. Right? Oh, we call it light blue. Okay. I'm just going to call it blue. That'll be less cognitive dissonance for people as they write code for this in the future. Okay, and orange. Forgot yellow. I don't even know if we're using yellow anymore in the design. Okay, so here's colors. You can see this folder starting to take shape with some reusables there. Nice stuff, good stuff. We need a type definition yet, so type.ts, And what we generally do here is we're going to define out every single like reusable type style, so that let's say you semantically you want to use an H2 in your markup, but it should probably look like an H1. That's fine. Visually you can do that. The markup needs to be proper for screen readers and for search engines and for anything else, but you can't have more than one H1 on the page. But what happens if you want to have a giant one? Not best practice, but you're going to have that at some point. So what we're going to do is export const H1. And let's say the H1 is going to say font size. Ooh, let's bring in the base. Import base from base. And then we're going to use it. So base, what was it, 100, I believe? Let's go check. Yeah, 100. So that's base 5. Boom, done. Line height, base 5. And there we go. Now we've got a nice H1 setup. And the font weight is actually not bold for any heading, so I'm going to set myself up with a const heading equals font weight. And all of this is CSS and JS again, so you're going to see we're writing JavaScript, but really we're making use of, well, we're writing CSS, but we're making use of JavaScript. So whatever else might go up here, say we wanted to determine a font like letter spacing or typeface, whatever, we could put it up there and then share it. So export const h2 equals, I'll just fast forward and get all this stuff done. No need in watching. Okay, just like that, it's magic. We have all of our H1s, we have everything defined. And you can see that this base function is really coming in handy now, because like for example this, let's do the mental math on that. That's 2 times 20 plus 0.25 times 20, so it's 45, right? And that's a much easier number to remember versus if you had to remember 0.11111 times whatever, right? So all of these are lined up perfectly to our grid. I also gave myself a body here, which is font size just off the HTML font size, but then the line height is 30 pixels. So another thing I did just now without having to put you through is went through and updated our app.ts and just styled a bunch more globals. So this is like the CSS reset for Trouble. This is how we do it. It's not a lot of CSS. It's not a daunting thing to write your own reset. Really, you're just cleaning up a couple styles and you're calling it a day. But so I've got this global tag. This is JSS Global, the plugin, and we are using all of the tags that we defined in the type file, and we're just pulling them in here, and we're just setting some more cleanliness here. So if I hop over to the browser, you can see that everything is being taken into account nicely, and we are making magic. So the next thing in the CSS folder we're going to do is we're going to add a queries.ts, and with JSS, media queries are a fairly cool thing. They're a little unconventional, but I'm going to show you how they work right now. So with our media queries, we're going to need to rely on our breakpoints. So I'm going to import breakpoints from, and I think that's like this. Okay, and then let's export equals, what is it, app media max width, and then we have breakpoints dot xs, and we got to give ourselves pixels, and good. So here we're going to have one for every single size. Maybe that's enough, who can say? We need small, we need medium, right? We need large, extra large, and extra, extra large. Don't need this one. Okay, so what are these going to do for us? I will show you. Over here, we're going to actually employ that tactic that we used, that we set up. So remember, we're declaring the font size as HTML font size. If we go over to the browser and we look at how this guy is sized, well, you don't want to have to write that, do you? So all we did was we wrote base 5. And then, boom, we get this crazy, disgusting rem value, but it lines up perfectly to a multiple of 20. So if I use this what font tool and I show you, perfect, 100 pixels right on the dot. So that's why we use that base. But the cool part is this rem is relying on the HTML font size. But what if we go over here and we say, let's say queries. Oh, you know what? I'm going to do us a favor and export default, and then we're going to say XS. Like that. Then over here, I'm going to import them. And then I can use them. So let's say .m. Let's say for medium screen sizes, we want to shrink the font size to HTML font size times 0.8 or 0.75 for a cleaner number. I don't know what this is going to look like, but let's check it out. Bam, perfect. All the sizes all shrink down automatically, and we don't have to do anything about it because the rems are taking care of everything. So that's going to be a recurring theme. We do everything like that. It's pretty cool. Okay, so now the last thing we need for our CSS foundation is Z indexes. And I just went and added the file. It's not anything too dramatic, but what we do is we maintain a central place to configure all of the top level Z index needs of the entire site or app or whatever. And in this case, the site is pretty simple. It only has a fixed header. It has the page content. So you see as I scroll through here, the header stays above all the content, but when I open up the mega menu sits behind the header. And I think that is all that we need right now. So I've just quickly thrown this together, page 10, modal 20, header 30, keeps it all in one nice spot, and we're good to go. That could change as we build the app out, but having them in one nice spot is a good pattern to follow. So next up, with our CSS declared, I think that's pretty much all we need. As you can see, it's really not that hard to roll your own. I mean, obviously, we're going to come into some circumstances coming up that we're going to need to get pretty advanced with CSS. But as far as like a foundation or a framework, don't need it. It's not that much CSS to write yourself. So with that said, I think we should move into the base app configuration. And we're going to install some dependencies, and we're going to see what we need to, from like a third-party package perspective, from maybe just pulling in some of those reusable UI libraries that we've talked about. Faceless UI, I believe I mentioned it before, but in case you are joining us for the first time in the second episode, we maintain our own set of pretty cool React components for common use cases, and right now it's called Faceless UI. That's gonna change, I think, but the first one we're gonna do is we're gonna install the CSS grid. This is a small package. It helps you set up a consistently applicable CSS grid throughout your interface. And if we hop back over to the UX, you'll see we've got a 12-column system here that has a max width, and then it will break down on mobile to be a 4-column. So we're going to use this package. I'm going to install that. We're also going to use the Faceless UI Modal package. This one is super nice. Modals might seem like a simple thing at face value, but in reality, there's a lot of things that happen behind the scenes that you really don't want to roll it yourself. For example, modals need to be accessible. There is a high degree of specific intent that you need to keep in mind when you are building modal windows, because as a modal pops up, you need to trap the user's focus, so that if a screen reader is reading the page, it's not just reading all that content on the page. Generally, modals are all the way tucked at the bottom of the page too, but it comes into view, it focuses the user, and then the screen reader can properly read that information instead. So this modal package, we use it quite often. We've used it for just about every website we've built in recent history. So Custard, this mega menu here, that is being used. The Faceless UI package is being used there. It's I think it's being used on the TRBL site actually as well. Yeah, if we scroll down, we get this menu button here. That's the Modal package. It gives you those transition times too, so it gives you a lot of nice stuff. We're going to install that one. Let's just start with those two right now. You don't have to use these if you don't want to, but they're helpful for our workflow. Building websites over and over in an agency setting, you kind of come to use your own components, and it will optimize your process. So let's fire it back up, yarn dev, hop over here, and we're going to import those components, and we're going to set them up because both the CSS grid and the Modal package have a provider infrastructure. So if I show you, let's do the Modal first. I can show you, this is an example of how it's used. Let me zoom in a couple times here. You have to render the Modal provider at the top of the app, and then your modals themselves are just rendered with a separate component. Now we're not going to follow this all the way through. All we need to know right now is that we need to add the Modal provider top level component. So let's import it. And let's import grid provider as well. Cool. And then we're going to wrap the whole app. Cool. I thought that would format. Nope. Okay, so the Modal provider takes a couple props. Let's see. It follows BEM conventions for CSS prefixes, so you can give it a prefix if you want, control the transition time, you can set the Z index. Now that is going to be handy because we have JSS. Our variables are actually just JavaScript, so this is the reason we like JSS. We can just pull that Z index in from our style sheet and pass it directly to this provider, and it's going to use our Z index, and that's pretty cool. So let's see, import and then Modal, boom, just like that. So not only is that going to be helpful in CSS, but it's also going to be helpful in JavaScript. Now the last Faceless UI package that we're going to install for right now is Faceless UI window info, and what that does is it gives you helpful information about what's going on inside of your like with the size of the window, what the breakpoint is that you're at currently with React. Normally, like with media queries and CSS, you know, that's great for breakpoints, but you're going to need that information in JavaScript as well. So if your components need to render separate things at separate screen sizes, you can do that. And window info, the package helps you get there. So, and it also responsibly measures screen size. And so I have already installed it. I'm just going to import it here. Boom. And it needs breakpoints to work properly. And the cool thing is we can just import our breakpoints from our CSS. Copy that, go down here, paste, and boom. So with this, I believe we have all of the building blocks to actually start working on our... No, we need to define the grid provider. We need to tell it what kind of columns to use. So the grid provider itself, you're going to configure, well, yeah, I wouldn't worry about it for now too much, but I'll configure it. And the things that it needs is row gap. And this is going to be at separate sizes because small screens, you can set a row gap, you can set medium sizes, you can set large. So let's just say for now, what did we have? I think it was 2 base. So I could pull in my base function. And I could just say base 2. And I think it's going to be like that for all. So medium is base 2. Let's just keep cruising. And then we have large base 2. Well, why am I doing that? Okay. And then another prop it takes is column gap. So CSS grid, I'm not really going to go too far into the weeds right now about how it works, but it's super cool. We're not going to support IE11, so might as well take full advantage of the new CSS grid. So this is a, yep, okay. And then finally we have cols. And the columns are how many columns wide we're going to be using for different screen sizes, just like everything else. Small, let's say it's actually 8, medium is 8, let's say large is 12, and extra large is also 12. Cool. Okay, now that we have everything we need, I think we're going to go back to the mockup and we're going to try to make some structural decisions about what types of like containing elements, containing components we're going to need to build to support this UI. So as I'm looking at this right now, obviously the grid is constrained in a margin left auto, margin right auto type of thing, but some elements are pulling outside of the grid. What is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 baseline units to the left and the right. So this right here, all of these color blocks are pulling outside of that grid. Some things are full width. Some things are organic. So really, I can see two things right off the bat. The first one is we need to have a grid container, like a max width for the grid. And maybe we want to, what do we want to call that? Grid max width grid. I'd say grid max width. Makes sense. And then we also need something for the constraint for this as well. Now, I have no idea what we're going to call that, but let's write the first one. Let's write the grid max width, and let's put together something on the homepage at least to get us cruising, because right now it's still looking beautiful. Ooh, also, let's set that background color right now. Just get that out of the way. So we're going to go app, CSS, we got HTML. We're going to say background color, colors, enter, dot, antique. Boom. TypeScript. Thank you. There we go. Big difference. I know. I'm dramatic. Cool. But now, our first component. What do we want to call it? So this boilerplate doesn't really enforce the folder structure, but we're going to start that. So generally, I like to have like a layout folder. And the layout folder is going to contain everything that is meant for like more than one page. So, for example, studies and pages are both going to have the header. They're both going to have the footer. They're both going to have max width for grids. They're both going to have whatever that component is that allows it to break out of the grid a little bit. So let's start with the layout folder and let's create grid max width, or maybe just grid container. Yeah, I think that's a decent name for it. So let's create a new file, index.tsx. So far I've been creating a lot of TS files, but definitely need TSX if you're going to have JSX in your TypeScript file. So import React from React, const grid container. Oh, look at that. I love it. Just kidding. I hate it. React.fc for functional component. I'm going to set myself up because, well, does this need props? Probably not. It's probably just a presentational component. So I can probably just return a div, but it will need a class name, right? So import, I'm just going to stub this out real quick. Use styles from CSS. And normally what I do is I'm going to create a css.ts file here, and I am going to export that hook from JSS. So the convention will be css.ts. And so if you look at this file, it's going to be the same thing as the app.ts. We're going to have import create use styles, and then we're going to export default create use styles. And that will be our convention for every component throughout this whole app. And you're going to get into a rhythm of this after a while, so it'll kind of flow. But right now we have grid containers, so we need to have some type of base class. So I'm going to say grid container, and then we are going to say it's an object, and then we need a max width. And what is that max width in our mockup? Let's see. 920. It's intentionally skinny for this design, which is pretty cool. Now we do not have that as a breakpoint, but it might be nice to double up on that and maybe reuse this breakpoint? No, I think we're going to create a new file and we're going to say, where should that go? It's a variable. We know we're going to need that in our CSS and our JavaScript, the max width, that 920 there. But where does it go? I kind of want to have it, maybe we'll just put it in app for now. And as we move forward throughout this, there might be, that doesn't make any sense. I'm going to just call it max widths instead. Or structure, let's say for now. Export const, we're going to say GridContainer width equals 920. And then just for the fun of it, because we know we're going to be bumping outward that 6 base to go to the left and the right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah. We're going to export that from this file as well. So export const grid overflow equals base 6. Done. Cool. So now, back over into our actual layout grid container, I'm going to import that. Import, let's say, what did I call it? It was like 1 second ago. I have memory problems. Grid container width. Up a couple folders. Cool. And we need margin left auto and margin right auto. Okay, now over in our TS file, we can import use styles, and then we can say const classes equals use styles. Okay. We do have children as a prop. So React will give us that in their functional component type. Anything that you pass in here will be joined. It will be an intersection type with the base props of a functional component. So children is automatically there. So here we go. I believe this thing, that's all we needed for it. We're probably going to change this. We're probably going to update the max width at certain screen sizes, but we can get back to that. I guess we should name that. Maybe, no, I guess because it's a max width, it will shrink down on its own. So for mobile, when the screen is less wide than 920, we can probably just have it flow 100%. We can adjust that if we need to, but for now, got this component. Why don't we try to use it? And why don't we try to use our grid in general, just stubbing it out and seeing how it works in the pages slug. So this is one thing that I haven't really talked about yet, the Next.js structure. I'm not going to go too far into it because it's covered in the boilerplate itself, but you can see this ... slug. That means that there can be any number of slug parameters. Like if you wanted to nest pages in your URL structure, you might want to say like /about/team or /about/history, whatever you might want to do. This naming convention for Next.js pages allows you to match any pattern. Now the problem is this template is exactly the same as the homepage template at index.js. So you can see index.js simply imports these dependencies from the slug template and reuses the exact same things. So they're just centralized here. You'll see they're exported. But so why don't we just hijack this for a minute? Why don't we just say row, can we get it? Nope. No, grid. I was hoping for IntelliSense from that package, but not today. So what are we going to do here? We're going to import grid from Faceless UI CSS grid, and we're going to render one. And then we're going to render cell. Still nothing. Great. And then we're going to say in here, let's give ourselves 2 cells. We're going to say span equals 6. Or is it cols? I can't remember off the top of my head. Let's say here is some content. Cool. Okay, boom. So our columns are working. If we inspect that, this is using CSS Grid, and it is automatically giving all the inline styles that we need to support our specific configuration. Pretty cool, but it's flowing to the max width of the page. So that's not good. I'm gonna zoom out a little bit. I was zoomed in like a psychopath because I have a larger monitor. But let's go add that component that we made. Let's say GridContainer. Pop that here. Now this should center the grid for us. Bam, perfect. And how wide is it? Let's double check our work. 920. Beautiful. Looks like our gutters are properly sized as well to base 2. And in this case, that's going to be 40 pixels. So we are moving right along. Now, I was doing some thinking about I mentioned having another component for the overflow. But I don't know that it's going to be that simple, because I think scrolling through this, every single component is going to need to be different in terms of what actually overflows and what does not. For example, I mean, we can probably still have some base components, but some of them only overflow on one side. So this component here, the red background overflows all the way to the side of the screen on the left, but it does not do that on the right. So that's going to be a tough CSS problem to fix. And I'm probably going to fix that with like a before or like an after, like a pseudo element. And I'm just going to position absolute and let it flow off the page in one direction, X distance, so that it always looks that way, kind of fooling it, and then have an overflow hidden container. So this probably makes no sense. I understand that. We'll get back to it. But the moral is, let's figure out a couple specific pieces here that we want to... Maybe... What can we mock up that would just... maybe we'll get back to that, because I think this is going to be the first layout building component that we do. So when we get back to this one, that's where I think we're going to be able to stretch our creativity a little bit in terms of how to accomplish that. But this is good. I like the grid. I like how it's already working properly. Let's see. We don't need to keep that there. That's a proof of concept. That's all we need. Well, why don't we try to shrink it down and see what happens? Okay, so you'll notice that both of these, so the grid has adapted. It's only 8 columns now because we're on a mobile screen size. And you'll see that these have automatically stacked because they have more width than is available to them in the grid. So we don't even have to write any more code. It's just automatically responsive. Bam, perfect. For the last couple things in this episode, I think what we should do is we should stub out the header and the footer and just get those things in the right spots. And then we'll call this episode a day. And then we'll start to style these components in the next episode. We'll just jump right into building out the header, and we'll start building out some of these layout components. So if I'm looking at this structure here, we know we have the page template, but we're also going to have a studies template. And those two things are both going to need the header to be rendered and the footer. So we can either render those individually in each template, or we can make some type of shared layout component that takes care of rendering the header and the footer for us. But there's a trick. So we're probably going to do some page transitions, just something subtle. And when the page transitions, you don't want the header to fade in and out with the page. You want the header to stay between the page transitions. But the footer, we don't really care about that. The footer can disappear because it's going to be in a different vertical spot every time depending on how long the page is. So generally what we do is we're gonna render the header itself in our base app outside of any layout or like template component that we're going to make shortly. We're just going to render that right here, but the footer is going to go into that template component. So there's 2 components we're going to make. The first one, I'm going to make header. Well, there's 3. I'm going to make footer, and we're going to make template. And these are logically grouped, anything that has to do with the layout itself, anything shared between pages. And let's just index.tsx index.tsx, and okay, so first thing, header. Okay, let's just wire up our styles as well. Okay, and then we'll say, what do we need? The header has padding, right? Outside padding. It doesn't adhere to any max width or anything. It's just going to flow. So I believe what we're going to do is just have that header component, the container, and then right now we're just going to render a couple pieces of fun stuff. So, well, let's make them divs. Logo and menu. And the class name, classes, .header. Okay, cool. This code is all pretty much exactly the same for the footer, so I'm just going to, I mean, it's just a React component, right? So I'll just paste that there. Cool. Rename. Make some css.ts. Rename the template. I don't think the template's going to have any styles. I don't know what they would be, so we're going to remove that for now. We can probably also render a fragment so that we don't have to put extra markup on the page. If we do need styles here, we can go back and add them, but I don't think we're going to. So what we do need to do is children and footer. Really? Oh. Okay. Now the template's going to be responsible for rendering the footer and whatever else we decide. The header is all set as is. We don't have this file yet, do we? No, we have to. We're going to say header. Now this needs padding base 2 all the way around, right? Yep. Perfect. Bonus points, top right, bottom left. TRBL. Padding, top right, bottom left. Love it. Surprise. All right, so, yep. That's enough CSS. No, we need display flex. And we need justify content, space between. And that will make it so that the first element is going to be all the way to the left. The second element is all the way to the right. Cool. Now let's render our header in our app. And I'm going to, usually I keep the CSS together, so I might hit enter here. What does that really matter? Nothing. Okay. Cool. And let's render it right here. Okay, there's our logo, there's our menu. Here's our template. Our footer doesn't have any content in it yet. Why don't, oh no, we didn't use our template. What does our footer have? Oh, I'm stupid. Let's say footer, cool, and then template. We need to actually render that, so I'm going to close the 1,000 files I have. Cool. Ooh, this is going to break things. Let's just stub that out too real quick. What do we want to do? Let's just do some minimal CSS for the footer, just so we know that it's there. Nope. I'm just going to write the word footer. That looks complicated. Looks good to me. Perfect. So let's go into our slug Let's render our, instead of main, we can render template. How's that? And that's it for now. That's the only page. Now we have custom 404. We'll come back to that. Yeah, so that should be it. Go over here, check the browser, footer. So now we're really cooking. See how the fonts get smaller automatically because of our font size change and how we're using rems? They go smaller here. That's probably too small. We'll adjust that, but still pretty cool. Okay, so that episode was pretty straightforward, nice and easy. Laid the CSS foundation for what we're going to be doing in the future, and also started a couple React components, made some decisions about our layout, where we're going to put the header, the footer, etc. Nothing groundbreaking yet, but the pieces are in place to rapidly advance into actually having something that looks like the mockup. So all these pieces are here. We haven't really used them together, but that's going to be coming together quite quickly in the next episode, which will be coming out soon. But thank you for hanging in there for this episode. And as always, now this is my second YouTube video, so maybe I'm getting a little bit more smooth at it, but please bring on the feedback because I want this to be entertaining, but not really, more like educational, I guess you could say, to an extent. But I also want to know what you think about the approaches that we take in these videos, so we can learn something from each other. And I'm looking forward to keeping it going, and I hope you are too. We'll talk to you soon.